Well, it just got really busy in the office here for like a quick second. Yeah. Seems like every time we go to rip a podcast, things just happen very quickly outside of this.
Gotta happen.
Yeah, something's always going down. Always good stuff.
Yeah, the boys from South River Fly Shop in Waynesboro, Virginia, just stopped by actually for a tour.
That's beautiful.
They were fishing the Salmon River, so wanted to come by
and
see the facility. So
I'm sure they'll have it. I'm sure they'll have a great time. It's a little chillier out than it usually. I even broke out a flannel today. It's flannel season again. I put away all my golf shirts because I'm done golfing, and I broke out all the flannels. So it's that time of the year. Anyways, welcome to the program, everyone. This is Cortland Hooked, the podcast. I'm your host, Brooks Robinson. I'm sitting in the studio with Matt Barovi today. Matt, thanks for coming out. Matt is a Cortland customer service rep and an inside sales rep for Cortland. I also have our co-host, Scott McCann.
Hey,
Scotty. Boys, we got a killer guest coming on today. I'm very excited about it. We'll get to him in, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so. But we were just chatting earlier before we turned the cameras on about Matt's recent trip, kind of wrapping up the tail end of Albie season. Where did you fish Rhode Island or Connecticut for Albies?
I fished mostly Connecticut coast. I fished Rhode Island a couple weeks ago, but that was pretty early on. Yeah, mostly Connecticut coast. Got out on a boat for a little, but it was pretty tough out there. So yeah, mostly the shore grind. Hooked one, got dumped on. That was pretty much it.
I feel like
2 days of blind casting.
I feel like you've had some pretty successful trips this year so far. As this is probably the worst one, I would say, judging from your text. I mean, as far as fish count goes.
Yeah, I had to fish from shore most of the time, so it's always a grind, but
sometimes
I was happy to hook one.
Sometimes
least,
it can be better on the shore as far as like northeast salt fishing. I mean, there's definitely been days where I've been on the shore and guys from the boats couldn't reach the fish I was on.
Yeah.
And I've also been on boats and not been able to reach the fish, and the guys from shore are just plugging away.
Exactly. Yeah, there's definitely a fine line between that. I mean, yeah. I don't know.
Were you spin fishing or fly fishing or both?
I was just fly fishing.
Just fly fishing?
Yeah.
Mostly just targeting albies the whole time?
Yeah, I was just blind casting mostly.
Did you see any bluefish or stripers or?
Caught a couple small bluefish, 15 inchers.
That's fine.
No stripers. That was pretty much it.
They're kind of moving. Albies are tough though, because you get a good report and you're like, oh, it's going off. And then you get there and it can be spotty. Those things, they come and go.
Disappear. They just disappear.
I know. I mean, they disappear with the tides. They disappear with the day.
Yeah.
They
were there. They just, that spot, that specific shore spot I was at is really good in the morning. They just run the wall a lot there. So it's a good spot to intercept one, but I don't know. It seems like it's more of a morning spot.
Sure.
Then again, I'm sure you could go in like a week from now and they could be everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's like you just got to be there.
Albies
you got to be in it to win it.
Are some of the most fun as far as fish that you can target on a fly or spin gear. I've done it both. I've done it, from Massachusetts to New Jersey. I think one of the most fun days I ever had targeting albies was with spin gear. Fly gear is a ton of fun, but sometimes when it's super windy and choppy, it's just, your lines blowing all over the floor of the boat. It's getting wrapped up in your stripping basket. I'll never forget, we were in Montauk. I don't know, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. I pull up to a parking lot and there's like a taco stand, like a food truck. And we start just kind of chilling, looking out of the inlet, the cut. I think our boat was in like Star Island Yacht Club or something. And we're just kind of eating away, just hanging out. It was windy. We're like, we're not going out in there. And all of a sudden, the inlet just cuts loose with albies. I mean, just spraying everywhere. So we're like, all right, let's go out. We didn't leave more than 100 yards from the inlet of the harbor. And we just had like 3 to 4 hours of just non-stop albie fishing. It was just absolutely incredible. And that's just the way it can be. And then other days you kind of expect it and it's a dud, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing with it. Like when it's good and you hit a day like that, it makes every day blind casting, not seeing shit worth it.
They're tough. Albies, they're tricky. Like you'll be on them and then they go down, and then like 100 yards away, you'll see them blowing up. You race over there in the boat, you get about 3 or 4 shots in, then they go down, and you turn around and look where you just came from, and they're blowing up literally where you just came from.
They love the prop wash too, because it stirs up bait.
So that's my theory. I don't know.
They do.
Yeah, I feel like it is. So what I've learned is every time we would race over to a new school of albies, I would turn around and they'd be blowing up right where we just left from.
Yeah.
So my theory is, and we've talked about this before, is that prop wash, when it creates all those bubbles and everything, right? A lot of that bait, I feel like, relates to that and tries to hide in it. And then as those dissipate, there's just a wad of bait in that prop wash. So what we tried a couple times was, I was like, let's just do a loop. So put some albies down. We do a big giant loop and we slowly creep back into kind of where we just left. And then as soon as those bubbles dissipate, it was just constant albies again.
I think that, and also that the power of the prop just disorients the bait.
Yeah.
You know, kind of tosses it around and stuff, which they obviously like.
Yeah, I was watching, this is totally unrelated to albies, but I was watching a video of killer whales going for like a seal, and they were like blowing like a cloud of bubbles to disorient it and like make it all confused.
Totally.
So I'm sure it's probably similar to something like
for sure. Any advantage they can get to like herd bait up, or that's why they like the tides, because it, you know, there's some current
shoves
that helps them
shoves the bait. What were they? I mean, usually they're on, you know, rain bait, sand eels. Was there something specific that kind of the bait of the day?
Bay anchovies, I would say they're eating the most of right now.
Correct.
There was some big pods of peanut bunker around. I saw. I saw like a couple blow ups on peanut bunker, but I think it's mostly anchovies right now.
That's usually that's a big ticket item for them. I'm not gonna be able to get out to really New England coast as far as albies, but I'm hopefully. A few years ago, I caught them in Barnegat Inlet in New Jersey. A little bit later in the they cool. Just work their way down the coast. Sometimes they're weird. Like I remember last year, I was talking to one of my shops.
Dude, they were around for so long last year, until November.
Well, last year I talked to him. Like usually New Jersey's kind of like an October-ish time frame is when those albies kind of push through. Usually they will hang out until about the first big storm that blows through. Then it kind of disperses them and they'll start to get a little spotty after that. But last year I was talking to one of my shops and it was like late August and he's like, dude, the albies are here and they're thick. I'm like, isn't this like 2 months early? He's like, it is. 2 days later, he's like, can't find them. You know, and then in Massachusetts, someone's like, hey, they just showed up. I mean, it's obviously not the same fish. There's a ton of them around, but normally, they work their way from north to south, you know, throughout September, then October, and they're pretty much gone, you know, as far as the Northeast fishing goes, about late October.
You know, usually by November, but last year they were around for some reason.
We get those big storms, sometimes it's a hurricane, sometimes it's just a really big nor'eastern that just kind of it flips the water completely. It makes it really dirty on the shoreline, which they don't like.
No, they don't like that.
That water temps flip a lot, which they don't like. They like kind of consistency. Those are kind of the two big factors in what makes them move, and I'm sure it displaces the bait too.
Yeah, they definitely hate dirty water. I mean, it's they're probably one of the most unpredictable fish in terms of, I mean, obviously you can bank on it if you get a certain wind for a couple of days and whatnot of them being in a certain area, but I don't know.
They're unique. They're
tough, man. I'm glad that.
When did you go to North Carolina last year and target them?
That was in November.
Which is like almost a completely different school of albies, isn't it? Aren't they're a little bit bigger than ours?
They are. Yeah, they get some big ones.
Florida's got even bigger.
Buffaloes.
Yeah, Florida's got
pounders.
They got even bigger albies down there in Florida. I don't even know if it's the same strain.
That's
of
the
albie.
thing. I'm glad that they're doing they're starting to track them and stuff, because there's literally no research on albies, which is crazy.
Correct.
Because I mean, I guess at the end of the day, they are considered a bait fish, even though they're a game fish for us up here. Like in Florida, people chunk them for bait and whatnot.
I think that they would definitely have started a tagging tracking system if they were more of an edible fish. I mean, can you eat them? I'm sure you can. Do people? I'm sure random people do from time to time, but I only know people catch and release them all the time. But you are correct. So I was told that, I think it's the ASGA, the American Saltwater Guide Association. They're going to start a tagging system for them, or they have this year. That's already going on, and hopefully we can find out where these things are going, where they're at. You know, in the summertime, why they're migrating to what they're doing. So
are these the same fish that you catch in North Carolina, Florida, or where do they go offshore?
Do they mingle at some point in time? I don't know. I remember
it'll definitely be cool to see.
Who was it? There's a tuna captain out of Long Island, and I remember one day he was offshore. He usually goes after yellowfin or bluefin, whatever, jig and pop fishing, and he's like, I remember he made a social media post, and he's like, there's acres of albies out here. I don't know how far offshore he was. I don't talk to him too much, but I always follow him because he's got some cool stuff going on. And anyways, he was like, if this is a sign of what's to come, it's going to be a great albie season.
I mean, there's hundreds of thousands in the Sound right now, if not millions, and I hear there's even millions offshore as well.
They're pretty currently. I wonder how long those things live.
Seems like it's going to be a really good year. It already has been a great year, but I don't know, man. There's just
hopefully that study and tagging system tells us a lot about it. Anyways, so we're going to get to our guest. Mr. Honson Lau is going to be joining us today. Honson and Cortland have been working together, I'd say, for maybe 6 or 7 years now. It's been a while. I remember when our Florida sales rep, Captain Frank Catino, shout out Frank Catino, I was working in, I think, customer service one day, and he called me and he goes, "Hey, buddy." Classic Frank. He's always starts, "Hey, buddy." He's like, "I got these 2 guys from Florida that are gonna come on board and help us." I'm like, "Cool." He's like, Willie Lee and Honson Lau. I'm like, sounds cool. I have no idea who you're talking about. Well, turns out these 2 gentlemen, Honson, who will be joining us here shortly, have been definitely an instrumental part of helping us do some product research, field testing, product development. I consider both those guys really great friends. It's just been a long journey hanging out with those guys, fishing with them. So we're going to get Honson on. Is he on? Is he in the background there? I see you, Honson. Can you hear us?
Here. Brooks, got you loud and clear, bud.
Oh, beautiful. And you got good Wi-Fi down there. Where, Honson, where are you located right now?
I'm in Miami, Florida, in my own home.
Are you, thanks for joining us today, first of all, before we get to all these questions. Were you born and raised in Miami or South Florida? Have you always lived there?
Well, I wasn't born in South Florida, but I moved here when I was 3 years old from California. Glad I did. Sure. And I was raised here in Miami.
Have you always kind of lived in that Miami area, or have you moved around a little bit, South Florida? Or have you just been kind of stationed? I think I've been to your house a couple times. Has that been kind of your home base for forever?
It has, and we've always had a vacation home down in the upper Keys in Key Largo with family, friends, and whatnot. And so I spent a lot of my time as a kid after school down in the Keys. I'd get out of class, the family would take a trip down to Key Largo, and that's where we'd spend a lot of time growing up. I also had a lot of friends down there, a lot of friends from up here that had houses down there. So we'd go down there and we'd hang out, we'd fish, and we'd, do all the things that kept us out of trouble.
For sure. I mean, you're a hardcore angler, I would describe. I mean, you really live and breathe it every day. You also guide. When do you get into fishing? Who influences you to get into fishing? Did you just grow up watching Flip's show on ESPN? Does your uncle fish? Does your dad fish? Like, how do you start fishing? I mean, we all start somewhere, right? I grew up on a lake. You grew up in South Florida, but what's your first experiences fishing, and like when does it really kick off for you where you're like, I love this and this is what I want to do?
I mean, even when I was a kid, before I can walk and all that, my parents, they fished. Even in California, they fished. They went to the pier. Of course, I went with my parents. I don't remember anything from that because really wasn't conscious of things going on around me at the time. I was a kid. And so I've been around the water. I've been around fishing. Obviously, my parents and my family never really did the technical fishing that I'm into today. It was, fishing for food. We would catch, brim and this and that and snappers, and that would be, activity and then food. Then growing up, of course, I got into fishing because of that. I got into grabbing a rod and reel, and I discovered, there's fishing on TV as well. So I started watching TV and started watching some of the shows like Flip's show, like Jose's show.
Sure.
I had a show back then as well. And, I did a lot of bass fishing around all the neighborhood stuff because we had all these canals and lakes and ponds all around Miami that I would just ride my bike to, or my parents would drop me off at, and I'd go bass fishing.
I feel like that's how we all started, was riding a bike going bass fishing.
Yeah.
Was it yeah, right? Was it largemouth, or did you guys have peacocks down there when you were younger? Or when did those
did.
Keep going.
I didn't know what a peacock bass was until I researched what it was after I'd caught it. My first freshwater fish I caught here as a kid was a peacock bass, about a 5-pound peacock bass on a rooster tail, of all things.
Beautiful.
One of those little rooster tail lures. And, I didn't know much about fishing back then. I just knew, okay, this is a cool, flashy lure. I'm 8 years old. I'm behind my buddy's house in a lake, and I'm casting at this thing that's sitting on a bed. I don't know what it was. And I thought it was some kind of rock bass or something. I didn't know. I caught it. Of course, I took some pictures. I went to a tackle store then. Fishing Line Bait and Tackle was our local tackle store back then, and they told me what it was, and I said cool. So I started catching those. I started catching largemouths, because then I bought some plastic worms and this and that, spinner baits, all that stuff, and I kind of learned the differences between what I needed to do to catch peacock bass and what I needed to do to catch largemouth bass.
Sure, I feel like anyone that's grown up targeting bass on a bicycle, you obviously had a couple different colored rooster tails. You probably had that silver and black 3-inch OG Rapala, a couple soft plastics, maybe a tub of
red shad, the red shad culprit worms.
Yeah, we have. Up here it was topwater frog. Up here, I definitely had a tub of night crawlers with me and some hooks because that's just what those fish eat up here. When do you start to get into fly fishing, Honson? I mean, a lot of people, I feel like, that fly fish today, they probably grew up with spin gear in their hand for a period of time, unless their old man or their uncle's just a hardcore fly angler, and that's how they start. But that's usually not how it happens. Like, what age do you start fly fishing, or what gets you into fly? Is there something that just you see this guy doing and you're like, that looks cool, I want to try that? Like, how does that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, I was basically walking a canal bank, casting my little Rapala, catching peacock bass, and I saw a guy standing in a corner casting a fly rod and just catching fish. I said, you know what, that was cool. That's pretty cool. One of my buddies I grew up with, he used to go to North Carolina with his family, and they used to fly fish, and he would tell me about catching trout and all that. So, I really took a liking to fly fishing from the fly tying aspect.
Sure.
Where when I was a kid, I took a course to learn how to tie jigs. I was always meticulous with the stuff I used. I was very peculiar with, I wanted this color jig, this color combination, but they don't make it, but I want to tie it. So I took a class that taught me how to tie jigs, but it also taught you how to tie flies. So it was through fly tying that I actually got into fly fishing. And it was on my 11th or 12th birthday that my dad asked me, okay, you're wanting to get into bird hunting and you're wanting to get into fly fishing. You have to pick an avenue. Do you want me to purchase a Remington shotgun for you, or do you want me to purchase a fly rod for you? So I thought about it a little bit, and I chose a fly rod.
You should have told your dad, if I can kill birds, I can tie flies with the bird feathers. So why don't you buy me both?
There we go.
That's great.
That's funny that you said you started fly tying kind of first too, because most people start fly fishing and then kind of get into fly tying in the beginning years or a little afterwards. Yeah, so that's kind of cool.
Were you tying like conventional jigs and then that translated into tying flies? When you say like, you know, jigs, were they bucktails? Was it for bass? And then you just kind of got, would you get a vise, you know, and kind of start that way and just it kind of evolved?
Yeah, it was bucktail jigs because, you know, I was using those to catch peacock bass. I mean, and I was using them to catch bonefish down in Key Largo. My first bonefish I ever caught was on a bucktail jig. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted particular colors and particular jig heads, particular weights. So I was getting real meticulous with that. Yeah. And
you are very particular about your gear. I know that from fishing with you for the last 7 years. My personal favorite fly that you tied on for me, because every time we fished, I'd make you guide me, is the flashbang. I remember being in, I think we were in Chokoloskee that day with our good friend Mark Wexler. Water's a little dirty on that side. I think, what is that? Mostly just like it's basically a black kind of bait fish pattern with some flash in it. But you would throw this fly. I remember putting on drum, snook, and redfish, and these fish were just garbaging that. And I'll just never forget that day in Chokoloskee. I mean, I had never been kind of the Gulf side of Florida. That was my first real experience, other than maybe the Everglades was probably as close as I got to it. But I don't know if you remember that trip, but that was fantastic as far as fishing and my first experience with the flashbang, which is like, I think it's a great name too.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, basically, you know, we had this real cold weather come through. No, it wasn't the cold weather. Sorry, this was a grass kill. We had a grass kill that happened. So all the stuff in Florida Bay that I really liked to go red fishing and snook fishing at was really slow. There weren't very many fish on the flats. So I started exploring a lot in Chokoloskee. I bought a shallower boat then to go and do more of that. And, you know, I found where some of these fish were in these real shallow coves. And the water was typically not super clear. It's a little bit on the dirty side. Yep. A lot of the fish were very aggressive. So the flashbang is basically a bunch of flashabou tied as a tail, a foul guard on there to keep it from fouling, and EP brush palmered forward with some bee chain eyes. And I tied it in in darker variations with color combinations like copper and like copper flash and black EP fiber, or gold and tan EP fiber. And it's like the fish react to it one way or the other. There's no in between. It's either they're going to garbage it, they're going to run after and eat it, or they're going to run away from it. But they always see the fly. You throw it at them, drag it past them, and they're always going to see it.
Yeah, that was what we got done with that trip. What the heck happened? Somebody left a note on the truck. There was like a robbery down the road, and someone robbed a store with the same truck that you had, and they left a note on our truck, the boat launch. It was like, you better come back and return everything you stole. And we're like, what the hell?
It was a Yeti cooler. Like someone stole some Yeti coolers from some store. Apparently my truck fit the description because, you know, a white truck is unique, right?
Yeah, right.
And I went ahead and called them and clarified, and apparently they had already caught whoever did it. So they did apologize to me.
Oh, but, God, you know, that was great. I remember you're like, what the heck is this? I think we went into the store right next to the boat launch. You were like, hey, I didn't steal anything. We've been parked here all day. We used your boat launch. And they're like, it wasn't us. And then, yeah, you called that number. And they're like, yeah, we caught the guy. Sorry about that. I mean, it was a pretty nasty note. Like,
yeah, it's like, we're going to come after you type note. I'm like, all right, come after me. I'm innocent.
We were 25 minutes down the road from the gas station where it happened. Like, they ventured a long ways to find your truck. Of course, I think that's a dead end at Chokoloskee, so you can only go so far. Yeah, one of many great stories I have hanging out with you over the years. Yeah, like I mentioned, Frank. I remember Frank called that day about 6-7 years ago. We've worked together really well. You know, making a lot of great lines, saltwater lines for Cortland over the years. I feel like we've become really good friends. We've been on a text chain for 6 years. Whether it's fishing or just, you know, stupid stuff that we can't repeat here today. So I appreciate our friendship, and obviously all the help that you've done with Cortland, field testing, you know, we got a lot more stuff that we got to work on together. So I'm excited for the years to come. It's going to be good. So like I said, you're guiding now. I mean, you've been a guide. When did you start guiding? Like, what age did you start guiding, and where did you start guiding? Like, what body of water?
I started guiding in around 2009, and I guided from Islamorada over to Flamingo, and that's where I mainly did most of my earlier trips earlier in the day. I did a few in Biscayne Bay, but I did that for a few years, and then an opportunity came in healthcare, which was my other job, to get some certifications and to kind of grow my career from that end. So I kind of had to put guiding on the back burner for a few years, right?
Sure.
And once I got established in that end, got my certifications, kind of established myself in the healthcare field with what I'm doing there. I kind of structured my life where I can actually get back into guiding and complement that with what I do today. Just like, most people are firefighters / fishing guides.
Yep.
I kind of have my schedules structured that I can be able to do this as well. So for the last, I'd say 5 years, I've been back guiding.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, a lot of the guides that I know, they are I call them part-timers, although I don't consider it part-time. It's just, at the end of the day, you love fishing and you love to teach, people. And there is something about guiding that I know most guides love. It's just they actually enjoy watching people catch fish and learning more than anything. And I feel like, you have a knack for doing that. Not everyone can guide at the end of the day, right? You can be one of the best anglers in the world, but actually having a personality and teaching people, it's definitely a trait and a skill that most people don't have. Some guys try it, and after a couple of years, they're like, this just isn't for me, man. And I mean, I'm sure like every client that shows up on your boat, different personality. I mean, sure, your regular clients, you know what you're getting into, but I mean, fishing and weather, it's a curveball every day. And then you get these, 2 or 3 clients on your boat. They throw you another curveball. Are they a decent angler? Are they newbie? What's it going to be? So guiding, I'm sure it can be an absolute grind. I mean, just going out and targeting fish, especially in South Florida on your own, can be a grind. And now you're supposed to put someone else on a fish, that may or may not know what to look for. I know when I first went down to Florida, there's things that you look for that, in the first few times fishing in Florida, you have no idea what you're doing. And then after a while, you kind of realize what you need to key in on. So I couldn't imagine guiding in Florida, especially for tarpon. Do you feel like guiding for tarpon or a different species is the hardest in terms of putting your client on a fish?
I think tarpon is the easier one of all of them for me, just because there's so, during tarpon season in the spring, they're so readily available. They're around. The real factor is, the weather. Is the weather going to ruin your chances of sight fishing? Or are you going to have to adjust by going somewhere and dredging a tarpon, which is like, blind casting where you think they're going to be at, and with an intermediate line and stripping a fly through that area. So, tarpon actually is the easier part of guiding for me. I think the difficult part with guiding is probably bonefish and permit. Mm-hmm. And for me, my experience is it's really breaking the angler's habit, because a lot of anglers that come here are used to red fishing, or they may have fished with another guide in the Bahamas and bonefish with them. And the way that we present our flies, the way that we strip our flies in particular, is very different here. The way I prefer it, it's very different than that. Your presentation for a bonefish versus a redfish, you can't throw past a bonefish and drag the fly in its face like you would with a redfish and expect it to breach eat the fly.
Yep.
Where you throw your fly, where it lands is where you're fishing the fly. You can't rely on your second shot. It's got to be your first shot. So there's a lot of things like that go into this that you have to teach your angler, who may not be very experienced at that. And some days you get very limited shots. You can have a day. In my day, a banner day would be to have more than 5-6 shots at fish in the 8 to 15 pound class for bonefish, right? And You can have that day and your angler can catch one fish, and that makes the entire 8 hours.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And sometimes, you know, you have to realize that, hey, if you had those 6-8 shots at those big fish and you didn't make it happen, I mean, you had to have prepared for that moment. If you didn't prepare for that moment and you didn't make it happen, that's the day.
Yep. This is a 2-part question, Honson. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but you're guiding, you know, Islamorada, the Keys, the backside, Everglades, Biscayne Bay, where I know, and it'll vary on the season, but taking that into account, where is your favorite place to guide out of those kind of general areas that you do guide in? Like, what do you look forward to the most in a certain season, and kind of what's that species that you love targeting in that area? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's kind of a difficult question for me because I'm torn in 2 places.
You got to pick one.
2 species. I got to pick one.
You got to pick one.
If I have to pick one, rest of my life, only do that. Bonefish. I love bonefish.
Really?
Firstly, because they can be found in in a lot of different waters I fish. And just everything about bone fishing is it's real classy. It's an honest fish.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my obsession. It's bonefish.
I figured it would be tarpon, so you proved me wrong. I think we were chatting before the show started, and Matt's like, we got to ask him some tarpon questions. I'm like, well, we got to figure out what his favorite species is to target. And I know, Honson, you and I have discussed it, but I've never caught a bonefish before, and I want my first bonefish to be in Florida. I know a lot of people go to, you know, Belize and Bahamas, but just the history of bone fishing kind of in the Keys and kind of near where you are, a little bit north of the Keys, I just want my first bonefish to be in Florida, and hopefully it's on the bow of your skiff. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, calm down. I know it's tough, man. So you proved me wrong there. All right, so you've fished a lot of places in your lifetime, right? California and Florida and all. I mean, Florida alone is super diverse, from, you know, Key West all the way to Jacksonville to Apalachicola. Where is your favorite place to fish in the world? It can be in Florida, it can be in the Bahamas. Like, if you had to pick one place, not guiding, I'm talking, you got a week off, you got endless dough to go do whatever you want to do. Where are you going? Maybe you've never been there before. Like, what's a dream place to fish? Or maybe it's a place you go to all the time and you're just like, I love it here and I want to keep going back.
I mean, as much as I love it, I love fishing Biscayne Bay. Biscayne Bay is, you know, without a doubt, my favorite place to fish in the world. But if you were to tell me, hey, tomorrow I am going to give you 5 days, 6, 7 days off to choose a destination for the next week where you're going to stay and fish.
Yep.
Based on where I've been, I would probably say Andros.
Really? For bonefish?
I would just go to Andros and I would immerse myself in easy bone fishing and spoil myself for a week.
Are you on a boat or are you wading?
On a boat. I prefer being on a boat. Actually, to be honest, I hate wading. Whoa. Because I am height impaired. I'm short. That offers a disadvantage when you're 5'5".
I wasn't gonna say it. I wasn't gonna say it. Being on a skiff, you're higher up. Oh yeah.
And I like the teamwork aspect of it.
Sure.
You know, as much as wading is fun, walking up to the fish and casting and being, you know, so close to them to be able to connect with them. I feel like I like that the teamwork aspect where you have somebody pulling, you're on a skiff, you're being quiet, you're trying to sneak around the fish and try to get that presentation, and you're both working together to achieve that.
I totally agree.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, I don't know how many times we've fished together, Honson, but maybe 6, 7, 8 times, and we've fished together all over Florida, which has been awesome. But you're right. You're going out there. I mean, you're on the polling platform. I got a fly rod in my hand. You're probably seeing more fish than I can see. You're telling me where to cast. You're telling me how to strip. It's an absolute team effort when, especially tarpon fishing, or even bone fishing, although we haven't done that together yet. I love the team aspect of fishing, specifically going with you. I remember, I think the first time you and I fished together, Key Largo, Oceanside, trying to catch those tarpon that were swimming by. It was really cloudy. Just unsuccessful due to the fact of just weather was terrible. But the second time, I was telling these guys a story. The second time you and I fished, I think we went out of Flamingo. We were tarpon fishing, and it was a long day. I think I'm still sunburnt from that day, but I have pasty white skin, which you always make fun of me for. And I was telling the guys, I was like on the platform probably for like 3 or 4 hours, and there was just singles, rogue singles here and there. And I was like, hey, I got to grab something to drink. And you're like, all right. And I open up the Yeti cooler, grab something to drink, and I shut the lid, and it just goes poof. And you go, dude, I go, what's up? You go, don't ever shut the lid of the cooler like that again. And I felt like I was 4 years old getting yelled at by my dad. And I was like, why? You're like, you just scared every tarpon within a half a mile of here. And I'm like, oh, my bad. And you were absolutely correct. And that day I realized, how serious tarpon fishing is. It's like, there's a lot that goes into prepping for the day, getting out there, scouting. And as well as I do, some days you just don't have a ton of shots, and you have to make those shots count. So when you get some newbie from Cortland down there slamming the lid of a Yeti cooler, ruining everything in sight, I sense your frustration. And from that day forward, every time I shut the lid of a Yeti cooler, it goes very slowly. Even when I'm cutting up deer at home and I'll grab some venison out to bring it in the kitchen, that lid just gets shut very, very slowly, because I feel like you're right behind me on a polling skiff about ready to scream at me. And the guys think that's hilarious, but honestly, I wanted to curl up in a ball. I was so embarrassed that day. I was like, I just felt bad.
Don't take it personal.
No, I know.
Did the cooler fall? Like, because sometimes it'll just slip and then slam.
No, the lids. It was like a Yeti 45. I just slapped the thing, and it just boom. And Honson's like, bro, what do you? I was just embarrassed. I felt like I had let you down. And I just
really, that made that much of an impact.
Yeah, no, trust me. I closed the lid of a cooler very slowly now, even when I'm at home by myself.
Well, you live and you learn.
Yeah, it was a tough day to begin with, and I just made it that much worse. I was embarrassed. I felt like I let you down. We've had some great days on the water. We've had some tough days. I feel like we're due for another great day coming up here. Maybe the next iCast we'll get down there. Maybe I'll travel to South Florida and we'll do some bone fishing. That'd be great. Yeah, is like your prime time bonefish in your neck of the woods? Like peak season in terms of like they're here, they're comfortable, they're happy. Like this is a good time to target them. Like when is that in a year time frame?
The best time of year is actually early spring, from like March to April. That's my favorite time of year. They're plentiful and there's big fish around. But the late summer is also great. You have a lot of fish around, a lot of smaller fish. And then in the wintertime, you have, in the cooler months when you have those warm days in between, that's when you really have your shots at your biggest fish.
Yep.
So do they stay there throughout that whole time span from March all the way until winter? They're always there.
Yeah, they're here. You can target bonefish, every day except for the coldest of days. And even on those days, you can still go out and maybe, get a shot or two. Okay. At a mudding fish in deep water.
Now, what those bonefish are keying in on in terms of food, does that vary from season to season? Like, are they, locked in on something in March, April, and May, and then it's a completely different type of food source in, let's say, August and September?
I think during like late winter months, when there's a lot of shrimp around, they key in more on like shrimpy type patterns, just because there's so much shrimp pushing out of the bay.
Yep.
That time of year. But for the most part, the flies I fish that mimic the type of things they eat really depend on where I'm fishing. There's certain places over hard bottom I'm fishing, shrimpier patterns, and there's certain places over grassier bottom where I'm fishing, a grassier bottom where I'm fishing like crab patterns. Mm-hmm. So it really depends. I think more so on the type of terrain you're fishing. Makes sense.
Matt was asking me earlier because Matt was like, is this going to be geared about tarpon? I'm like, we're going to talk to Honson about everything. I feel like you and I have tarpon fished more than anything, probably redfish being second. But if you had to pick as far as targeting tarpon, do you prefer fishing like oceanside migrators, or do you like backside laid up tarpon, or do you like going into the Everglades and finding those fish kind of laid up in there. Like if you had one scenario in terms of tarpon fishing in and around South Florida, what is your ideal? I know that, you know, on a given day, you got to switch it up and do whatever is right for, you know, the situation or the client. But in a dream world, like you want these fish laid up, or do you want hundreds swimming by in a school? Which one is it?
A combination of both. I want Everglades migrating tarpon.
Interesting.
I want schools of fish moving through the Everglades zone in groups.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Are those
that's my favorite scenario.
Do you find those fish that migrate over there are in just as big groups? That, I mean, there was days when those days were in like Key Largo and stuff. I mean, there's wads of fish coming through. Are there's that many fish coming through on the Everglades side, or is it more kind of like smaller groups? Like how does that work out in terms of those two areas, and how do they differ?
The bigger groups are definitely going to be on the Atlantic side.
Okay.
The backcountry, you have smaller groups. I think the biggest group I've ever seen back there was maybe 10 to 15 fish.
Really?
But, you know, there are some big groups in some basins that move through. I mean, they just cycle through different basins and all that stuff that can congregate and get into pretty big groups. But, you know, the actual migrating fish, not the ones that are just circulating through different basins, those fish only move in, I've only seen groups of maybe 10 to 15 at most. A lot of singles, a lot of doubles, a lot of, you know, 3 fish groups. But those fish tend to eat the best.
Yeah,
like tarpon.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, where do you find the tarpon eat the best? Those oceanside fish or the backside fish, or those fish laid up way in the Everglades?
Fresh Gulf migrating fish. So any fish that comes from the Gulf and comes in that's fresh, hasn't been thrown at in a while, that's the fish that's going to eat the best. Yeah,
I would agree with that, because I feel like those are the only tarpon I've ever fed in my life are fresh Gulf Stream fish. I don't want to say they're stupid, but if they're eating my shitty cast and my fly presentation, then they got to be the easiest. All right.
They're less crappy.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there is a lot of pressure on that ocean side. A lot more boat traffic over there versus the backside. And like you said, when they float in from the Gulf, they probably haven't seen anybody in a long time. So they're pretty more apt to eat, you know, the first thing that they see. What, hands down, your favorite tarpon fly? And I'm not talking, you know, if it's the worm hatch, it's this, if it's that, like, what do you enjoy throwing the most? Like something big and black. I feel like a lot of the good flies that I've thrown with you are just like big, you know, peanut butter type patterns. Like, what do you like seeing a tarpon just wolf down the most? Is it a worm pattern?
No, not really. I mean, when I'm fishing on the ocean, it's hard to say one favorite tarpon pattern, because it really depends where you're fishing, right? But you know, when I'm ocean fishing, I can be fishing a worm pattern, or I could be fishing some sort of pipefish looking pattern. I could be fishing a shrimpy pattern. It really depends where I'm going. So it's hard to say what's my favorite tarpon pattern, because there's no one I stick with.
Sure.
Now, I'm fishing in the backcountry. The one reliable tarpon pattern I always start with is a big black snake fly.
Yep.
And it's a giant clump of black feathers. That's all it is. So anything big and dark, it doesn't have to be something that takes forever to tie. Just something that doesn't foul. It's big, it's dark, it has a presence, it pushes some water, and it gets the depth that you need to fish it at. And that right there is typically where I start.
For sure.
And some days, all day, I'll fish it all day.
Do they tend to see black better than other colors?
Yeah, I think black is the one color that shows best.
I feel like I've had the most success on. I mean, I've hooked a few on some other stuff, but I feel like 3/4 of the time it's something black and purple.
Black, purple, yeah, something dark.
Seems like in that darker water, not the gin clear water, the darker colors seem to, in my experience, they've produced for me. Hey, listen, I got a couple more questions for you, couple personal ones too, but let's kind of get into some gear stuff related to what you're doing in Cortland. Over the years, we've done a lot of samples. I send you every single sample I make. What I appreciate most is your honesty. You've been a great help in terms of field testing, and you know, when we make something that's great, you'll tell me it's great. maybe one little tweak, when I make something that's just not working, you just say, hey man, that line sucked. And I really appreciate the honesty when it comes to that. You know, we work together really well. By far, what is your favorite Cortland line to throw out of, maybe it was a sample, maybe it's a line that's current. What's your favorite one out of everything that you've fished from Cortland since you've been working with us?
Funny enough, is the most recent sample you sent me, and that's that new Tarpon ghost tip line. It is literally the best throwing fly line I've ever thrown, and it's got some cool features where like it lands soft. I can throw a 9-foot leader on that. I'm typically fishing at least a 12-foot leader, but I can put a 9-foot leader on that and still make it land soft.
Sure.
And for a ghost tip line, an intermediate tip line, actually you're able to pick it up from pretty far. So it comes out of the water pretty easy too, and it's the perfect weight. It just for the rods I'm fishing right now, that line's thrown the best. It's just a great throwing line. It's a great fishing line. It fishes great. I mean, we recently fished it in a scenario where the fish are they roll and they lay up. Some of them lay up deeper, some of them lay up shallower where you can still see them. And we were hooking a lot of fish with that line. I mean, that line was it also cool thing about that ghost tip was that it's very weedy where I was fishing. So I didn't really need a fly with a weed guard because that line allowed that fly to just get underneath those surface weeds.
Yep.
So you don't have a weed guard that may or may not prevent you from connecting on a bite.
Makes sense.
You're able to fish this thing. It's under the weeds. You're not snagging weeds and worrying about all that. So it's a great line. I think that line's going to really change the game here.
If you had to pick between, say you only could go out with one line, are you fishing a full floater, or could you get away with that 9-foot intermediate ghost tip? Honson's talking about we're releasing the new Tropic Plus ghost tip this year. It's a 9-foot clear intermediate tip that we're talking about right now. If you had to choose between, let's say you're going to go through a bunch of different scenarios in terms of depth where you're going to fish, do you feel like you could get away with a full floater all day, or would that ghost tip be a better option? Let's say someone's going to call Cortland and say, hey, I only got a chance to bring one rod down. What should it be? Should it be a full floater, or could I get away with your ghost tip and make it work in all scenarios?
I'd say full floater in that scenario, because sometimes you get some places where the tarpon do get very shallow, and you don't want that fly to get down that quickly.
Gotcha. Can you manipulate the depth? Let's say some fish are deep and you got a full floater. Are there flies that you can put on to get down to those fish, or are they just not gonna basically swim the same on the retrieve because you're fishing it behind a full floater? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. You're definitely better to fit the line with that scenario. But if all you're left with is one line, the full floater will do most of everything you needed to do. And if the fish are deeper, I mean, I always carry a roll of lead wire with me. I've been in a scenario where the only rod I brought, it's not tarpon season. We're off in the middle of the Everglades somewhere, and I happen to stick a 12 weight in the boat with a couple of tarpon flies. And lo and behold, we're up some river, and there's a bunch of tarpon rolling, but they're rolling in the center. So all you've got is, okay, I've got a roll of lead, I've got some big flies, I've got a floating line. Let's extend your fluorocarbon leader a little bit longer so it gets away from the floating section of your line. And then you wrap a ton of lead on your fly to make it get down.
Where do you wrap that lead? Like specifically on the fly or the hook? Like
on the shank of the hook.
On the shank?
Of the hook. I always leave, when I tie my flies, I always leave a little bit of shank to leave room to be able to wrap some lead if I need to.
That's really good input. Yeah, that's good input.
So I have a question.
Go ahead, man.
If you don't mind going back. So I know you said that you got into fly fishing by kind of freshwater fishing with a spin rod and then seeing that fly guy there. When did you transition over to saltwater and kind of start fly fishing in saltwater and stuff? And then later on for tarpon?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. When I was freshwater fishing, I was also saltwater fishing. I did most of my own riding my bike around my neighborhood, freshwater fishing. But whenever I went down to say, friends' houses and stuff in Key Largo, I brought the same gear with me, and I was saltwater fishing. We can go to the backcountry and throw popping culture trout. I can walk some rocks, try to find baby tarpon and cast, little jerk baits at them. There's always snapper under the dock and free lining a live shrimp, catching snapper. It just, the freshwater fishing here, particularly the peacock bass fishing with the light tackle, translates very well over to saltwater light tackle as well. It's the same type of gear,
Sure.
very similar presentations. There's a lot of parallels between the two. So naturally, the progression when you start freshwater fishing is to also get into your inshore saltwater light tackle saltwater fishing, and then when you want to take it to the next step, you start fly fishing. Because I think sometimes you start, you get into fly fishing when you want to add a layer of difficulty, and then you come to find that sometimes fly fishing is a little bit easier than spin fishing for some scenarios.
Sure.
But you discover that only after you get into fly fishing. You won't really realize that if all you know is spin fishing.
That is very true.
That makes sense. And it's one of the things that I like about kind of your program and most guides programs in Florida is that you don't just fly fish. You are pretty hardcore spin fishermen too, and you guide both fly and spin. And a lot of the guys we work with do that as well. You're running Cortland Master Braid on your spin gear. What is your favorite color Master Braid and why? So we offer white, yellow, blue, moss green, and bronze. What is your ideal color for your scenarios in terms of both your personal fishing and guiding? Or does it not matter? You just like a color because that's what the color it is?
Yeah, I don't think it matters, to be honest. The color is just the color. It's personal preference. I mean, I know some guys that like the high vis yellow because they can see it. They can see it from out further. I think when you're casting out that far anyways, you're not going to see something that small in diameter if you're using like 10-pound braid.
Sure.
Doesn't matter to me. I mean, I personally like the way that the brown looks.
The bronze, yep.
Bronze, yeah. I like the way the bronze looks on a lot of my reels. So I use the bronze a lot. And then when I'm bass fishing, because I also do a lot of like largemouth bass fishing. So I also, I throw a bait caster a lot, exclusively almost when I'm bass fishing. And I'll run the bronze on that as well, just because the bronze just kind of matches well with our Florida Everglades water.
I agree. The bronze is a sleeper, bro.
It's an all-around color. That's great.
If you guys listening or watching have not checked out the bronze Master Braid and you're into spin fishing, or you got a bait caster, or you fish braid, the bronze color is an absolute sleeper. And I got a feeling that eventually down the road, it's going to overtake as far as the number one color. I feel like people, when they start to fish it, it's a visible color, but it's still kind of neutral at the same time. Does that even make sense? Like,
yeah, I don't think many other manufacturers make bronze as well.
No,
it's a pretty unique color.
You are correct. Cool. It is unique to Cortland. It's kind of neutral, like you said. It blends into your environment a little bit, Honson. I know we do well with it kind of in the upper Midwest for the musky anglers. More and more saltwater guys are getting into it. It's something, like I said, you can see it, but it's not high vis at the same time. So I was kind of hoping you would say that, but yeah, the bronze, if you guys haven't checked it out, it's a sleeper and you're going to love it. All right. That's enough fish. Go ahead, Matt.
We gotta get one more question in there just because I know people are going to be wondering.
Go ahead.
PB tarpon.
Personal best tarpon, Honson.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What is
my
it?
personal best was 100. We actually measured the fish. We measured the length and the girth, and we, put it into the BTT formula and came up with this number. It was 183 pounds. No, sorry, 186 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
That's insane.
I was going to say 187 because I remember the spot.
That's insane.
We went to the spot where you caught that. And I remember like it was yesterday, like the whole scenario that, were you with Jeremy that day that you caught that?
Yeah. I was with Jeremy, and I was with my buddy Jeremy, and I was with my buddy Frank. Not Catino, different Frank.
Sure.
And we were back in the Everglades, and I'm an avid duck hunter as well, so I saw some teal flying around back in there, and they landed back in some back pond somewhere. So I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I followed all these winding creeks out to this one. It wasn't a pond. It was just a wider section of creek. And I see all these teal landing in there. I'm like, this is really cool. So we start pulling in there and looking at, and next to this teal, I see bloop, bloop. Wait, those are tarpon that just rolled next to those teal. And we started fishing those. We had hooked a couple, came off, and we kept pulling down. I see this one laid up, facing away from me. And by some miracle, I made some kind of curve cast, and the fly curved around, ended up inches in front of his nose. As soon as I came tight, he just barely cracked his lips and sipped the fly. And I had to fight this fish in a creek that was probably not 100 feet wide.
Correct.
Oh my God.
Correct.
That's insane.
I remember it. How long does that fight go on for?
Were you there?
No, but he took me to the spot. He's like, this is where I got that 186 pounder. I'm like, you got it here?
Yeah.
And
what is it like to hook a fish of that caliber?
Yeah, I mean, how long does that fight take? And like, do you know it's your personal best when you hook it, or does it not jump for a while? I mean, they all kind of look big when they get up that size. Like, how does that all play out?
I knew at that time it was the biggest fish I'd ever hooked, just because, I mean, just looking at it in the water, you could see that it was floating literally inches underneath the surface with his tail sticking out. You could see the entire girth. You could see the size of his face. So when I hooked that fish, I knew it was the biggest tarpon I'd ever hooked. So typically I don't condone fighting a fish for longer than 20 minutes, but I did fight this, and the water was cooler, so I did fight this fish for an hour before I landed the fish, and I fought him on a 20-pound glass tippet. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to catch this fish. I wanted to grab that fish worse than I'd ever want to grab any fish at that time. So I took my time on it. It was stressful at times when it would go around the bend of a creek, and we'd have to, really give the boat some throttle to get ahead of it, so they wasn't going to cut me off on a corner or a bend or something like that. And after an hour of stressful pulling on that fish, and I pulled on it pretty hard, I finally got it up, and we finally grabbed it, and did all the stuff with the pictures. We revived the fish and let it go healthy. And yeah, I mean, celebrations were had after that.
That's epic, man.
That's awesome. A long time, and that's a long time for you, knowing you and how good your fighting techniques are with fish. And I mean, I've been on the boat with you and with Willie and Frank fighting a fish, and the coaching you guys give me, and I'm sure you give them to your clients, as far as there's certain techniques when you're fighting a fish that if you don't know them or you're not told what to do, that fight's going on forever until you basically grab the rod from someone and break the fish off. Because like you said, there's only a certain amount of time you want to fight those fish. But knowing that fish went on for an hour with the techniques that you have in terms of putting pressure on those fish with the butt section of the rod, I mean, can you explain some of that to the people listening or watching that have never fought a tarpon before, about like how specific the techniques are of fighting a tarpon and how important that is to landing them in a reasonable time frame?
I mean, there's certain principles you follow. I mean, I can go into detail, but that would take forever. But certain principles,
the basics.
Is the basics. Firstly, keep a bend in your rod, right? As long as you have a bend in your rod and you're not straight rodding your fish, you're not gonna blow up 16 or 20-pound class tippet.
Sure.
As long as you have a bend in that rod. So keep a bend in your rod. First thing. Second thing is that you feel the fish. I always have my 2 fingers pinching the fly line because I want to be able to feel. That's a cool thing about fly fishing. Is that you can feel what that fish wants to do. If that fish is pulling, don't pull back at that fish. Let him pull. Let him throw its tantrum. Let that fish do what it wants to do. And the moment that it lets off, the moment it wants to glide or whatever, that's when you pinch it tight and you put the biggest bend in that rod that you can put, and you just pull on that fish. And even if you have to high stick that fish, if it's the proper tarpon, if it's a rod that's built proper for tarpon fishing, it won't blow up on a high stick. You just pull as hard as you can on that fish. Even if you have to high stick, reel down, pull back, high stick because it's next to the boat. Just keep a bend in that rod and keep pulling on that fish whenever that fish lets off. When it wants to go, give it line, let it go, let the fish do its thing.
Sure. I mean, the first couple tarpon that I ever fought, and I didn't really get to ease my way into a big fish. It was just like the first 2 I caught were like actually the biggest fish of my career. what I've learned since then is those first couple fish, when I hooked them, I would immediately try to fight the fish as hard as I could. And since I've done that a few times, I've realized that the first few minutes of that fight, that fish is just going to do whatever the hell it wants to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's almost like just kind of stay tight to them, let them settle in, and then really try to whoop them. And I just remember the first couple fish that I caught with Frank and Willie down in the Keys. I think I was exhausted after about 6 minutes, and the fight went on, you know, for 25 minutes. And since then, even on smaller fish or bigger fish, like you said, when those things want to do what they want to do, you just let them, and then you let them settle back down, and then you just kind of whoop them after that. But there's definitely a right and a wrong technique to fighting large tarpon. I know Andy Mill does a really nice job in his presentations about how to fight fish. He's obviously hooked and landed thousands of them. I think he's probably got some videos out there on YouTube or even his presentations that you guys should check out. Andy Mill is just a legendary tarpon angler, does a great job explaining a lot of things tarpon, but specifically how to land them once you have them hooked. So you guys got to check those out. No, that's a great point, Honson, in terms of fighting those things. All right, last question, and we'll let you go because I know you're a busy man. We got to talk about food, bro, because you're a foodie. I
am.
I don't know if that's a word or a bad word, but I see these Instagram posts. I mean, lately it's like grilled Spam and rice wrapped in seaweed for lunch. There's just like endless sushi pics of you and Alberto. I know when we fish together, it's a Cuban sandwich every single time because there's just epic Cuban food down in South Florida. I know when I show up to South Florida, I'm like, you're like, hey, are you hungry? I go, yeah, I want to go to the most like exotic place that you can find. And you take me there and it's just incredible. What's with you and food? Do you just love food? I mean, dude, you're 5'5", you're like 110 pounds soaking wet. Like you eat like a champ, but you ain't gaining any weight. What's your favorite food to have on the boat? Is it Spam and rice and seaweed? Like you've been into that lately.
Yeah, I mean, I go through different moods. I can't say like what's my favorite because this week my favorites, or I'm going to be craving this. Next week I'll be craving that, or I might get tired or something. But you know, the rice thing, the rice and Spam thing that you're talking about that I bring on the boat, it's the ultimate boat snack. It's called a Spam musubi, and it's actually a Hawaiian snack, and it's basically sushi rice, put in a mold. You know, squarish mold. Yep. With Spam on top of it, another layer of rice, and then you wrap it in that nori seaweed paper.
It looks good.
Serve at room temperature.
It looks good.
It's great.
I mean, honestly,
I wanted to try that. It does look good.
I mean,
nice.
When I check out your Instagram page, I get hungry, honestly, instantly. And I do love a good Cuban sandwich from South Florida. Hey, if people want to check out what you're up to, Honson, what's your Instagram handle? I feel like that's the best platform where you are you in terms of where you show all your videos, all the food stuff you're into. What is that correct? And what is your Instagram handle so people can check it out?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's Tarpon WT, Tarpon Weight.
And do you have a website where people can check out some of your guiding adventures, or maybe they want to book a trip with you? How do they get a hold of you for that kind of stuff?
Well, I don't have my own personal website set up. In fact, I took it down. But where you can find me with trips and stuff in the future is going to be on anycreek.com.
Beautiful.
Anycreek.com.
Anycreek.com.
And it's basically almost like an outfitter with a whole bunch of different guides that you can choose from. And I'll have my own profile there with dates available, the book, and all that.
Love it.
Sweet.
Well, thanks for coming on, Honson. I mean, we love you here at Cortland. You're the man. You've been a great friend to all of us. We appreciate everything you do for the brand. You're a great conservationist in South Florida. You're a hell of a fisherman. You're a hell of a guide. Keep it up, man. We're going to let you go. We know you're busy. We'll have you back on here. Maybe in the springtime, we'll be talking about true, just straight up tarpon for an hour, which we're just going to pick your brain about everything tarpon. All right.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, I love it. All right, buddy. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
You too. Honson Lau, everybody. I love that guy. He's full of knowledge.
That is an awesome dude.
He's dialed.
He really
he's absolutely
is.
dialed. I know Mac Hoover shot that video with him. And
Correct.
Mac told me that, I mean, Mac's been around obviously on a decent amount of boats and grew up in Florida, is pretty familiar with tarpon fishermen. And he's like, when he went out with Honson afterwards, he told me he's probably like the top 3. He put him in like the top 3 tarpon anglers he's ever seen. He's like, that dude is like insanely dialed.
That's all he thinks about.
Yeah.
I mean, not just tarpon, but I mean, you know, bonefish
just
permit.
Fishing.
He
South Florida fishing in general.
If it's blowing 45 out of the north, he knows, hey, we're going to catch redfish and snook in this spot. You know what I mean? If it's a monsoon, he's like, we're going to go to ditches and find peacock bass. He's just a fishy dude. And he's just very knowledgeable in all aspects of fishing, both fly and spin. Dude can live bait. He can get it done.
He's very well versed. It seems. I need to go fish with him. I really need.
Just don't shut the cooler too hard.
I'm glad I got this warning ahead of time, so I definitely won't be doing that.
And he meant well when he's like,
for sure. No, he just wanted you to learn, bro.
He wants you to be successful. And like I said before, tarpon fishing, which we were doing that day, it is just so intense. There's just so much on the line. You might only get a few shots, and you don't want to screw those up. And there's just a small window margin of error, and shutting the lid of a cooler is definitely not a ideal scenario.
Happens though.
I'm gonna get him one of those like styrofoam coolers without a lid. That way I'd never have to shut it again.
You should they should make like a pad or something that goes on the underneath the lid, so when you close it, it's
or you just don't shut it like an idiot, like I did.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I guess that doesn't really happen that much, unless like you accidentally hit it and it like slams.
It is what it is.
It's all good though. You learned.
Yeah,
I bet you won't do it ever
again. No, I've never done it again. Yeah. Matter of fact,
even when it didn't matter.
Even after a few cocktails at home in the middle of the night when I'm by myself.
Yeah, exactly.
No, he's good. And dude, the food, like I've been on his boat, like I said, maybe 6 or 7 times all over Florida. I've never gone hungry, and every meal I've had has just been legit.
I see him on Instagram all the time. Just his stories of him eating sushi.
Introduced me to more food, ceviche, sushi, just fish I'd never even touched before. I'm like, this is awesome.
I wanted to ask him what his favorite sushi roll is.
I'm sure he's got one. Just check out his Instagram.
I know.
I'm sure
I wanted to hear from the man himself, though.
Oh, that's great. All right, Honson Lau, everyone. Awesome dude. Let's get to my favorite segment, Mr. Scott McCann.
Scotty, get your body.
Scotty, get your body.
Sometimes Scotty is stand-in Scotty, but Scotty's been sit-in Scotty in the studio lately. Probably when we have a guest in-house, and Ricky is usually here. Ricky is usually here. Ricky's traveling this week. Scotty's always here, but Scotty's sitting Scotty. So Scotty's going to read off a couple of the questions that he receives. Scott is the front lines of Cortland customer service, along with Matt. They go hand in hand, but Scotty's definitely maybe just a little bit here in terms of phone calls and the emails. He gets just absolutely crushed with stuff all day.
Trying to get to everybody.
But you're like a sponge. You soak them all up. Yeah. So Scott, he saves all the good ones for the show. So, all right, let's get to it. What's the first question you got, Scott? Are you ready for this, Matt?
Yeah.
You sure? All right. You burn out from LB fishing? Let it rip, Scott.
First one's from Harrison. I'm putting together a Euro nymph setup, and I am torn between the braid core and the monocore line. What are the main differences between the two?
Yeah, I'd say braid core for versatility, monocore for warmer summer conditions. The braid core is a little more supple, really nice for year-round winter stuff. On the contrary, people say that you get a little more sag between the guides with the braid core, so you actually get a tighter connection to your flies with the monocore. So that kind of is preference right there.
It is preference at the end of the day.
It is preference. It seems like the monocores might hold up a little longer, just might be a little more durable, but really I feel like the biggest thing is when you're going to be fishing it.
Yeah.
During colder months, braid core. During warmer months, monocore, or the braid core will handle fine. So it really comes down to preference. The monocore might shoot a little better too, but it's fine.
You are correct,
it's fine
man.
stuff.
It's like if you just don't have
really
a preference because you're just getting into it,
Mhm.
the braid core, the 022 level braid core is by far our best seller.
Yeah.
It's a great all around line. Like Matt said, if you are Euro nymphing on, let's say, tailwaters in the summertime where it's really hot out, but the water's ice cold, the monocores are definitely the way to go. It also depends on how you prefer to connect your leader to the fly line. The monocores are nice. Usually what we do is we sleeve off the last 3-4 inches of the jacket material and expose that monocore, and we tie directly right to the monocore with our leader, whether it's a back-to-back uni, blood knot, whatever. A lot of the hardcore anglers, like the braid core, they will sleeve the jacket off and actually splice in the leader inside the core. Definitely a super techie technique, no knot, very easy transition through the guide. So a lot of guys will pick and choose between mono and braid core depending on their knot connection that they prefer. But like Matt said, the biggest thing is you're not going to go wrong with the 022 level braid core. But if you are really sticking to, summer tailwater fisheries, we like the monocore. It holds up a little bit better in the heat. Again, can't go wrong with either one, just kind of preference based on the season.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
Next question's from Norman. I used to fish with Cortland's rocket taper line, and it was my favorite line that Cortland made. You no longer sell this line, so what current line would be the most similar in design to the rocket taper?
Good question. And we actually get this question
A lot.
A lot. And usually it's from a little older generation. So here's the deal. The rocket taper was a term Cortland used in the past. Basically what it is, it's a weight forward line, right? Everyone knows that, okay, there's level lines, there's double tapers, shooting heads, and weight forwards. The rocket taper is what we first came out with when Cortland built a taper into the fly line. And then after that, we came out with double tapers. And now it's general term use in terms of the fly fishing industry. You got to weight forward or you got to double taper. Those are kind of your two options as far as trout lines go. So anyone out there that said, hey, I used to have this rocket taper, I don't see the rocket taper anymore, it's a weight forward line. It's just a general term that we use now. Weight forward kind of covers a wide range of tapers. You could say any weight forward is a rocket taper. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like I said, it's just kind of the older generation that grew up with the rocket taper.
So as far as like our current lines going back towards like the one that we said, like this is the rocket taper, like would you say like probably like the peach is?
Yeah, like the peach was a rocket taper. The rocket peach.
Yeah.
I know Sharon, we were talking that before. Sharon, our plant manager that retired, she would always talk about the rocket peaches, and everyone here that was new was like, what the hell is a rocket peach? But she's talking about the weight forward peach because we offer them in a double taper and a weight forward. So yeah, anything weight forward is what we consider the original rocket taper. Now the original, yes, it was the peach weight forward rocket taper.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Next question's from Tony. I do a lot of striper fishing around Montauk Point, both from the rocks and on a boat. I'm interested in a cold salt striped bass line and want to get one for both onshore and from boat fishing. Which line would you recommend?
This is a good question. And we're like wrapping up striped bass season here, Montauk wise. You still got, a good month or so down the Jersey coastline as those things start to migrate down. But we offer 4 striped bass lines in the cold salt series. The striped bass float, the intermediate, the blitz, and the sink 8. As far as fishing from shore goes, I personally find, and others have mentioned this, the striped bass intermediate, which is a full intermediate, is ideal for that situation because when you're standing in the wash in the surf, the running line or the rear part of the head will cut through those waves. Okay, the striped bass blitz, which is an intermediate head with a floating running line, a lot of the times, like your head's doing what it needs to do, but the floating running line is getting kind of dictated with the waves that are coming in. So that full intermediate, and you've seen this, Matt, you do more saltwater fishing than I do at this point, specifically with that line. But having that running line or rear part of the head cut through the waves, so it's not getting just trashed by the surface kind of water and boil, that's an ideal situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely fishing in the surf. You want to use the full intermediate. I use the sink 8 90% of the time fishing from shore, just because it's
in deeper cuts and troughs.
Yeah, deeper cuts, currents, rips, anything like that. I'm always using the sink 8, just because it gets in front of more fish. Sometimes the intermediate can be tough.
Yeah,
it depends on the situation.
Depends on where you are,
the time of year and stuff. But most of the time, I'd say full sinking, just to have the chance of hooking more fish.
Yeah,
unless you you see them on top water, like actively eating stuff.
Gotcha.
And
Correct.
Intermediate,
and even though those fish are blitzing, intermediate line is ideal.
Yeah.
And Montauk specifically, because I fished there multiple times. An intermediate line is really nice. Like Matt had mentioned, he fishes a sink 8 line a lot. He's fishing a lot of like jetties and trothy stuff, where it's just
anything with
cut.
Deeper water that you have access to, sinking line.
The sinking line. The intermediate line for Montauk is really nice. Whether you're fishing, the north side or the Turtle Bay side, that intermediate line, anywhere and around that point is ideal. Does it get deep in spots? Sure. But most of the time from shore, you're not getting out that far as a cast goes. The intermediate line is going to perform the way you want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. All right. Next one's from Michael. I love trout fishing in the spring and fall. This year I plan to target trout in winter for the first time. Are there certain techniques and gear I should use to target trout in the winter?
Yes. The answer is yes. Trout in the winter versus the spring, it's almost like a completely different fishing scenario. Springtime, they're sitting in prime lies, little faster water, eating every single bug that comes down through their face. The wintertime, because there's just a little less food source, sometimes a lot less food source, they're not going to expend that energy sitting in the fast water because they're just going to waste it. There's not that much food. So they'll sit kind of in those slacker inside seams, adjacent to like the faster water, or just bigger, slower pools in general.
Yeah.
Streamer fishing is really good, some smaller streamers. And then I personally like to do that and indicator fish, kind of those kind of slackier inside seams. Can you Euro nymph through it? Absolutely. But sometimes you get to these big, deep, long holes where you want to send a nice long drift down through.
Yeah, your arm might fall off.
If you're trying to hold those, your rod up the whole time.
Nymphing's definitely the move there.
Yep.
And then, sinking line or sink tip line with streamers and just low and slow near the bottom.
Those fish are going to
try to keep it in the zone as much as possible.
They're going to capitalize on any like decent sized meal that comes down because there's not a lot of food in the wintertime. Now, tailwaters are a little different. There's a lot of midges still kicking around, you know what I mean? But your freestones and stuff like that, indicator fishing and streamer fishing is ideal. Gear-wise, wintertime fishing, depending on where you are, most wintertime it's cold, right? New York, Pennsylvania, Colorado, there's a lot of places you can fish in the wintertime. We prefer using a very supple line that's gonna maintain and work well in that really cold environment. That same supple line I'm gonna use in the wintertime, I'm not gonna use it in the spring and the summertime. I'm gonna use a more moderate kind of type fly line that's gonna hold up in the heat and on a boat. But yeah, like lines like the Peach line that's super supple, which you were just talking about, the SL, the Spring Creek, there's a handful of lines that we offer that are supple, that are ideal for winter scenarios.
We got a new indicator line.
The new indicator line. That's a great option.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Super supple, nice long rear taper, great for roll casting, mending. That'd be a great winter nymphing line.
100%.
Got a nice fire tip on it. Track that thing anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
What's next, Scotty?
All right, I got one more. This one's from Chris. I just recently purchased your master braid earlier in the summer. I've been using it all summer and fall, and it still performs good. When do you know is the right time to swap out for new braid?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, they're all good questions. That's why you bring them here. Yep. But, okay. When to swap out braid? There's a couple things that are going to go on. One, how much did you use it in the summer and the fall, right? Are you fishing every day? Are you fishing once a week? Where are you fishing around? Are you fishing a lot of docks and pillars? Are you fishing a lot of places that have a lot of barnacles or maybe zebra mussels? Go through that line. Are there nicks and burrs? Is it flawless? I find that, Cortland's color last system, our braid definitely resists fading a lot better compared than others. If that braid is just starting to fade, you've probably been fishing the crap out of it. So it's really dependent on where.
I would say that's a good starting indication.
Right.
Of when to change it is if the color starts to fade a little bit. Ours won't fade, like it won't lose all its color, but it'll start to fade a little bit,
if
as
it's
naturally anything
correct.
will. But
if that thing is fading, you've probably beat the crap out of it. But you got to go through nicks and burrs. Okay. So if you go through that thing, and if it's the off season, you got time to do it. Right. So another thing is what techniques are you throwing? Is it on spin gear or is it bait casting? Are you musky fishing? Are you saltwater fishing? Are you bass fishing? What is it, right? A lot of guys I know, they're only fishing a fixed distance the whole time. You spool up a spinning reel with 150 yards on it, or maybe put backing on it, it's a little bit less, but you're only throwing 20 yards at a time, throwing swim baits or this and that. A lot of guys I know, they'll take the whole braid off on a spool and they'll flip it around and they'll fish the other braid that's underneath it that hasn't seen the light of day. So, sometimes guys can get, a couple seasons out of a 150-yard spool by flipping around. Sometimes they get a nick way down in the bottom because they got dumped by a fish that went around a dock. And yeah, it's time to change the braid out. So it's going to depend on how much you're fishing it, where you're fishing it around. If it doesn't have any nicks and burrs in it and it seems fine, let it rip. If it's beat up and you feel like one time you got stretched out on fish and something weird happened, flip it around, try to fish the other side. At the end of the day, it's just going to vary. There's really nothing that's going to tell you like, I need to change this braid out, unless you're just having just failure. Is it breaking on the cast? Is it breaking on fish? Like he said, is it just completely faded? You'll know when our braid is beat. If it's faded down pretty well, it's probably time to flip it or grab some new stuff. You'll
probably know when it's time to change your braid, just because.
But off-season wise, it's a great time to just go through your gear, foot by foot for braid, fly line, regardless of what it is. Is that it?
Yep, that's it.
Beautiful, Scotty. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, that's a great show today, boys. I feel like Honson's an awesome guest.
He is, man. I know. I wanted to pick his brain longer, honestly.
We could have we could talk to him for 3 hours.
Yeah, we need to get him back on here.
Probably what we'll do come springtime. We'll try to find some time where it's like the weather is really crappy and he's off as far as guiding, and it's peak tarpon season, because he'll just be really dialed in to the whole scene. Maybe we can get him on, right before the heat of tarpon season, when there's a lot of people headed down there and interested in it. But yeah, the dude could talk about tarpon fishing for days. I mean, he's Everglades, the Keys, the backside, the ocean side. I mean, he really does get around. Like I said, we've fished, the guy gets around, man. He drives that Maverick skiff anywhere where he can fit that thing, which is actually most places, because that thing runs really shallow. So we will get back on, have Honson back on. But like he said, you guys should check out his Instagram if you're interested. I think, what do you say? Tarpon WT, Tarpon Weight.
It's good content for sure.
If you like fish, if you like food, he's got some cool videos on there. He's always bombing around. The dude's always on the water. Every chance he get, he's on the water. So we love him. He's a great friend of ours. I just, usually see that guy at ICAST every year. Sometimes we get out at ICAST with Captain Frank Catino. Shout out Frank Catino. Ex-mayor of Satellite Beach. I can't believe that guy was a mayor of Satellite Beach. That's incredible. He was, I forget how long he was the mayor for. I remember we'd be fishing with Frank. He's like, hey, we got to cut this short. We're opening up a new skateboard park in Satellite Beach. I'm like, what are you talking
about? Cut the ribbon.
We got to go cut the ribbon at the skateboard park.
He's a very personable guy.
I love that guy. I love that guy for getting Willie and Honson on board, because those two are just class acts. And we got to get Willie on next, actually. Willie,
Willie's a good guy.
He's a busy man. He guides full time out of like that Space Coast region, Cape Canaveral, Indian River Lagoon, Sebastian Inlet type areas. But yeah, he's, snook, tarpon, redfish, kind of anything. That dude's full of information too. So maybe we'll.
You know who else we got to get?
Text Willie after this. See when he wants to come on.
Justin Nugent.
Justin Nugent?
Yeah.
Hey, he's down there now. Cool. He used to actually guide in Michigan.
Yeah, for steel.
And then he moved down to Florida. He's doing that stuff.
Freshwater, peacock bass and stuff. But
We'll get
that
him
guy.
on.
That guy was cool. I met him at ICAST.
He's very nice as well.
Maybe next year we could get, when we go down there, we could do one in person with those guys
for sure.
Some of them,
I know.
whoever, because that would be a good opportunity.
Do an in person with Willie and Honson at ICAST.
That'd be sick.
Bring the mics and everything.
Even if it's not at ICAST, it could be in a hotel or wherever, dude.
I agree.
It doesn't even matter.
You know,
we'll just
do one at ICAST.
Yeah,
whether those guys are there or not.
The Auburn Bass team this year was doing a podcast live
from
ICAST. Yeah, shout out to them. It was pretty sick. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, it was dope.
We will see where this podcast evolves in another year, because I got a feeling it's going to go some places. Well, I hope it does. So,
it'll be nice
as long as you like and subscribe.
Yeah,
follow us.
Appreciate you guys listening today. Appreciate you guys watching. We hope you enjoyed it.
Friends.
Tell your friends. We're rocking and rolling over here at Cortland Hook the podcast. Like I said, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We got a big guest. I think our next guest is going to be Mr. Alberto Nye. Alberto Nye? Maybe I'm butchering that.
It's
Anyways.
It's Alberto Nye.
Alberto Nye. I talked to him on the phone last week. He's all about coming on. He's full of information. Maybe in person.
I know he's coming here soon.
Yeah, we're going to try. We'll see.
If we can get him in person, that would be legendary.
Yeah, you guys are not going to want to miss this episode. So anytime. Anyways, stay tuned. Next episode. Thanks, everyone. This is Cortland Hook, the podcast. Appreciate you guys.